Let's welcome in one of the best writers in the country and one of the best reporters in the country. Breaking down everything Gators breakdown is David Waters, and he's kind enough to join us right now. David, appreciate the time. How are you?
Good. Busy. I mean, the moniker of Gators Breakdown is there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation, but there are levels to it, and it is certainly pretty high right now.
Ultimately, if you had to look back at the Billy Napier tenure, where he was able to get talent, right, get a lot of players in, but didn't get the results on the field, why did it ultimately not work for Billy Napier down in the swamp?
Yeah, the first angle a lot of people will look at this is just not giving up the offensive coordinator duties as the head coach. And look, college football changed when Billy Napier was hired at Florida, no doubt about it. But he still wanted to do it his way. And look, I don't blame coaches to begin with in the tenure if you want to do it your way. That's what got you there. He was a play caller at Louisiana. Okay, you want to be the play caller at Florida? Fine. But as soon as it's kind of apparent that it's not going to work, don't be so, don't don't be so adamant about sticking with something that doesn't work. And he was just adamant that it was the best pulse of, the way he could keep the pulse of the team. He thought it was the best way that he saw Florida moving forward at offense, no matter what had happened. And it wasn't just, the offense wasn't terrible under Billy Napier at times under Florida, but there was another step to it. And it seems like there was just a lot of responsibilities on game day and outside of game day when you're that kind of head coach. So on game day, yeah, you're the play caller, but then Florida would have a penalty here, a penalty there, a timeout issue here, timeout issue there. And it was just the game management really, hamstrung Florida a lot. And would that have been cleaner if he wasn't so worried about calling plays? And like I said, just going to the offense had another step to it. It was a very inconsistent offense. So that is the main reason. And Scott Strickland, the athletic director, even said it too. There were many conversations about that aspect of Billy Napier. He even come out and said it today, and pretty much ultimately why he's no longer with us.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because everyone says Billy Napier is a nice guy, but how a nice guy could be that stubborn at the end of the day. It's really ironic. Now, you mentioned Scott Strickland, and this is another comment I see from Florida fans, and I can't really fault them. All right, you get rid of Napier, but why should he be able to choose the next head coach? Do you agree with the decision of letting Scott Strickland pick the next head coach for the Florida Gators?
I mean, publicly, he's going to say he's the lead guy. I think there's going to be a lot of conversation with board of trustee members, with big boosters who probably think they have a say and and all this. Will he have final say? Yeah, but I think there's going to be a lot of
hand guiding
pushing toward. Yeah, pushing towards. Okay, this is kind of how we want it to happen. This is what we want it to look like. And look, it's really not a big surprise. I know we'll get into it. If it is Lane Kiffin and he's the top guy, I mean, look, that's not hard to figure out. I mean, if you're Scott Strickland, yeah, that's the guy. If you're a big booster, yeah, that's the guy. But if it gets past Lane Kiffin, then where does it go? Where does it splinter? Who does Scott Strickland prefer? Who does this booster prefer? And I think that's where the conversation is going to go in the tug and the pull and all that goes into coaching searches. So at the very top, it's pretty easy. And Scott Strickland's going to get a lot of credit. But beyond that, then it starts getting, I think, pretty hairy.
What is the expectation, not in terms of coaching, just the standard from Florida fans about what their team should look like? I know, right, Spurrier and Urban Meyer, it means, hey, go win national championships. But I don't think that's realistic for Florida right now. And I think they need to be good again before they could be great. But from the Florida fan, you're in the swamp and you cover and you talk to those fans, what do they think their football team should be right now?
When you look at Florida, I mean, and you bring up Steve Spurrier, you bring up Urban Meyer, but go back to Steve Spurrier, and then, well, like almost right before Steve Spurrier, there was this very popular Bear Bryant quote that, hey, Florida's a sleeping giant. Okay. It took a trendsetter like Steve Spurrier to come in, and he's in the SEC, and it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and she's like, you know what? We're going to drop our quarterback back 35, 40 times a game, and we're going to launch the ball down the field. We're going to change something. And I think that opened up Gator fans' eyes of like and the population boom in the state and just the timing of it all. The type of athletes that you can get up Florida. It is speed, it is speed, it is speed. And where Florida has failed outside of Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer is trying to copy the Bama blueprint. No matter who you were bringing in, you were trying to copy the Bama blueprint. Well, Florida had their own blueprint they should have been following, not trying to copy Nick Saban, not trying to copy Alabama. That's where Florida really hurt themselves. You don't have Florida offensive line, high school, not very good, but you have a lot of speed. You have speed at DB, you have speed at wide receiver, you have skill player speed that you should be recruiting towards. And that's where I think Florida has to find itself. No matter who the head coach is, find yourself getting the type of athletes that you can get in your state and go from there. So I think you found two guys that were able to do it better than most with Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. That to me is the unlocking of what Gator fans want and when Florida has been at its best.
David Waters here with us. Does a great job covering the Gators for Gators Breakdown. All right, Lane Kiffin. I had these same conversations last year. Everyone's like, Lane Kiffin, Lane Kiffin, Lane Kiffin. They retained Billy Napier. I knew that the name was going to happen. It's been happening all year. Lane Kiffin, Lane Kiffin, Lane Kiffin. I personally don't believe Lane Kiffin's leaving Ole Miss for Florida. Where do you stand on that? And what do you think the percentage is when the Gators name their new head football coach that it will be Lane Kiffin?
I'm north of 50%. I'm like 70% there. Where the hang up is that if this had happened a year ago, it would have been even higher. I think Lane Kiffin would have left Ole Miss for Florida. Did Florida miss their window? Did winning last year at Ole Miss, more winning this year at Ole Miss, kind of cement him there in Oxford, where he's now even realizing even more that, hey, I can win here. The wins are piling up. I can win here. But, there's been connections to Florida. I mean, he grew up in the state of Florida with his dad, of course, was Monty Kiffin and coaching at Tampa Bay. So you had that connection. And then his wife, John Reeves is her dad, former Gator. There's a connection there. Apparently, the family likes the state of Florida and Gainesville. So there's some connections that could pull Lane Kiffin there. And he's even come out and said it, Steve Spurrier is one of, an idol of his growing up. So there's some things that could pull him there to Florida, but you do wonder if Ole Miss keeps winning. Does a playoff run, a deep playoff run come into the timing of it all? Does that come into play as well? Or like I said, just the wins keep piling up, and he has this realization that says, well, this new world of college football, the landscape has changed so much, and I can win here as much as I can win anywhere else. I'm safe here. Florida is a pressure cooker. I will fully admit that. He's got it, I won't say easy at Ole Miss, but he'll have it easier at Ole Miss than he would at Florida. That would be a lot to leave.
Yeah, that's why I don't think he's going to leave. Like, if we were talking 5 years ago and you said, hey, the coach at Ole Miss is going to reject Florida, I'd say you're crazy, right? If you would have told me that Kurt Signetti would reject Penn State, Indiana, I'd say you're crazy. But in this new structure, I don't see why you would leave Ole Miss for Florida. That's just me.
I still, going back to the previous comment we were talking about, I still think there's a recruiting base that sets you up nice for Florida. He's figured it out, and he's have to use the transfer portal at Ole Miss to compete at this level that he's competing at the last couple of years. You can't recruit the state of Mississippi and think you're going to be well enough to go compete. Well, you got to figure out a new way. In this new landscape of college football, he's figured out that way. And that transfer portal opens up this possibility. So at Florida, I think you go about it a little bit different. You can recruit the state of Florida really, really well, and then you can kind of cherry pick in the portal and to come up for some deficiencies that you may have in your roster. So I do wonder, still in this landscape, with schools like Ole Miss compared to Florida, I still think Florida could be more consistent. Like Ole Miss, they went all in last year. They didn't go all in this year. Is that because they can only handpick a few years that they can do that, or just that's where it would come to me in trying to figure that out. At Florida, I do think money wise, there's probably still more overall there in the landscape, NIL, and just in the state of Florida itself, outside of rev share, where it's kind of equal for everybody. I do think there's a little more opportunities in the state of Florida with the population in the state of Florida. There's some more opportunities there, so I do think there are things that Florida would be a plus at the same time.
David Waters here with us. If it is not Lane Kiffin, who's the first name that you then think of? I think of James Franklin, who could be a guy that could stabilize the program, even though I don't believe he's a guy you win a national championship with.
His name would be on the list. I don't know if he'll be the next. I think the next, and I don't know how likely it would be, but I think Florida would say, hey, you got to tell us no first. Now, be Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. Would that be another angle of Brian Kelly going to an SEC school, and here you are with Marcus Freeman leaving Notre Dame to go to an SEC school? I think that's where Florida would turn next,
Gotcha.
and I don't know the interest level if he'd accept that.
Yeah, I don't think that's real. You call, right? If you see Beyonce on the street, you say, hey, will you go on a date with me? You make her say no. I think Marcus Freeman would say no. So realistically, if it's not Lane, who do you then think they turn to?
Maybe Brent Key, Georgia Tech, Jeff Brom, Louisville. But then at that time, you're messing with two guys who are out there alma maters. So does that make the situation a little hairy? James Franklin mentioned no buyout. He's a fired coach, and that makes it attractive. Those are I think some of the names. I'm a big Kenny Dillingham fan of Arizona State. Once again,
alma mater.
Alma mater, a lot of connections there. So you start seeing where it can get a little hairy for Florida, but I think that's what the list would look like. And if it's not there, does Florida have to go G4 route again and bring up an Alex Goller from USF or Summerall from Tulane? That's just kind of the angle of what we're looking at here.
Wrap it up with David Waters. With the fan reaction, I would imagine, and hey, you could get rid of a G5 guy and then hire another guy. Would the fan reaction be, hey, that just didn't work out, even though Golish beat us this year, even though every coach says John Summerall is going to be an SEC coach one day? I would assume that's not the preference of the Gator fan right now.
It absolutely. You're hitting it right on the head. I mean, look, with Summerall, the reputation for him, yeah, he's going to be an SEC coach someday. It was kind of the same thing with Billy Napier. Mm-hmm. It was, go interview at South Carolina, go interview at Auburn. Okay, you didn't hear what you like. You're going to stay. You finally heard what you like, and now you're going to Florida. Kind of the same thing. So, yeah, that's why it would rub the fan base wrong. Those guys could be really good. I do think John Summerall is going to be a really good SEC coach one day. Can Florida afford to take that risk? I think was where the fan base is at there. So for a lot of the fan base, obviously, everybody's on social media now. It is Lane or bust for so many fans. And there'd be so much support behind it if he was the guy.
I obviously understand why the Gator fan wants Lane Kiffin. I don't think they're going to get him. That's just me, though. I do think, though, they could get an SEC coach. And I think Penn State could be interested in this guy, too. And I believe this guy's personality would fit both of those fan bases and kind of mirror image them. What about Eli Drinkwitz leaving Missouri for the Swamp?
Yeah, I should not have left his name off. He'll probably would be very high on the list as well. Maybe third or fourth on the list behind Lane and Freeman, and he gets the call. And certainly the offensive background, some of the reputation of a dorky personality, even though he's aggressive with it. So I think that's where that comes up for him. But what's been good about him is you cannot question his coordinator hires. And when he had to make them, unlike Billy Napier, he saw a problem as a play caller, head coach. You know what? I'm going to go get Kirby Moore. And where our offense is going to take another step. Blake Baker, very good defensive coordinator. Now a defensive coordinator at LSU and turned that defense around. So if you're looking for somebody who can adjust and adapt and hire good coordinators, Eli Drinkwitz checks a lot of boxes there.
You know, it's funny because you talked about names that I'll agree with in Brent Key and Kenny Dillingham, right? And they're at their current school. You even said a Jeff Brom. What about a guy like Jedd Fisch? I keep on seeing his name out there. I don't think I'm jumping for joy if I was a Gator fan, if they hired him, although he's a good coach. But is that a name that people are pushing in Gator circles?
Not much. Not much. Of course, you got the GA under Spurrier connection there. So there's a Florida connection there with Jedd Fisch. You'd get way down the list before you got to Jedd Fisch. And he's done a good job, turning around Arizona, getting the Washington job. The reputation of jumping around a lot is what kind of stands out with Jedd Fisch. And it's like, well, I mean, if you're continuing to move up, there's nothing wrong with jumping around a lot. That's how I've always seen it. So that wouldn't be a marker against him in my eyes, but I certainly with the little bit of Florida connection, his name does get brought up.
I will give you the Zach Gelb hot take question, which is just made for social media here. People throw out John Gruden. I even saw RG3 today threw out Tim Tebow. How about Tim Tebow and John Gruden for the Gators job?
Absolutely not. John Gruden gets way too much credit for a Super Bowl with Tony Dungy's players and hasn't done, not much outside of that. The Tim Tebow thing sounds like a Facebook group that just wants to have, doesn't really know what they're talking about there. No, yeah, no head coaching experience whatsoever. He wouldn't even want to do it, so it's that's just nah. But if you could have fun with it, I guess, but not happening.
So you believe it's going to be Lane? That's what it sounds like. That's what I take from this conversation.
If I had to go to Vegas, if you're making me go to Vegas, and I have to place a bet somewhere, that's where my bet would be.
And then who would the bet be if it wasn't Lane?
I'd go Eli second.
Okay.
That would be the bets.
There he is, David Waters, Gators Breakdown, about to cover a coaching search. I feel like this has been a 2-year coaching search, so it's probably nice that you could actually get underway with it.
Yeah, for sure. You hold off on hot boards and hot takes, but no more holding back now. We're fully in. We're fully ready for the ride.
David, appreciate you carving out some time for us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.